Welcome to section 1.7. In this section we will be talking about the rules for multiplying and dividing real numbers. Now the good news is that they're the same rules. So once we talk about multiplying, division should be pretty straightforward. Alright, so when you are multiplying real numbers, the product of any two numbers with the same sign will always be positive. So if you have the same sign, you know the answer is going to be positive, and all you have to do is just multiply their absolute values. Just forget the signs were there altogether. Same thing if they have different signs. If they have different signs, your sign is going to be a negative. So different signs means your answer will be negative, and then you will just multiply the absolute values of the two numbers that you were dealing with. So the work to show is going to be very simple. All right, so let me show you some examples, and then we'll have you try some. All right, so in A, we have a negative times a positive. Different signs means our answer will be negative, and then I'm going to set a parentheses. And then you need to multiply their absolute values. So absolute value of negative 3 is 3 times the absolute value of 8, which is 8. So my answer is negative 24. Again, make sure you show the rule, and then make sure that you show your answer. Again, you have to have both. All right, in B, we have a negative 5 times a negative 2. They are the same sign, so the answer will be positive. And then we will multiply their absolute values. So the answer for this is positive 10. 0 times negative 50. Now hopefully remember, 0 times anything is 0. No sign rule for this one because 0 does not have a sign. So all we have to do is put the answer on that one. D, we have a positive times a negative. So different signs, so my answer will be negative. And then you're going to multiply their absolute values. So my answer is negative 50. All right, so there's 4 examples to show you. Again, make sure you show the rule. Make sure you write your answer. If you would like, you can give the next 4 a try. Oh, I actually didn't have any. I thought I had 4 more examples. But again, just a reminder, any number times 0 is 0. So just threw that reminder in there. All right, so let's look at some longer examples. Again, we have order of operations that we can always fall back on when we have more than 2 numbers. So this is great. We don't need to use the rules for these. We can use order of operations. A is actually pretty straightforward. If you see that there's a 0, what's 0 times anything? That's going to be 0. So I don't actually have to do any work on this one. I have 0 times anything is going to give me 0. If you wanted to, you could do order of operations. It's all multiplication, so you could go from left to right. 5 times 0 is 0. 0 times negative 3 is 0, but notice you're still going to get the same answer. Might as well save yourself some work. All right, in B, this time there's no 0 here, so we actually have to do the work. So first, it's all multiplication, so let's start from left to right. Negative 1 times a negative 6 is positive 6, right? Negative times a negative is a positive, same sign. And then we have 6 times negative 7. Okay, different signs, so my answer will be negative, right? 6 times 7 is 42. So negative 42 is my answer. So again, utilize order of operations whenever you can. It will save you a lot of time. So here's a couple more if you'd like to try, again, using your order of operations. So if you'd like to press pause, feel free. All right, here we go. So again, from left to right. First thing I'm going to do is 8 times negative 6. Positive times a negative is a negative, and then you multiply their absolute values. 8 times 6 is 48. So we have negative 48 times negative 2. A very common mistake is to do subtraction here. Remember, with those parentheses, you're multiplying. So negative 48 times a negative 2, so a negative times a negative is going to give me a positive. So I know that answer is going to be positive, and then 48 times 2 is 96. So my answer is 96. All right, B, from left to right. Negative 9 times negative 2 is going to give me positive 18. So I have positive 18 times negative 1. Different signs mean my answer is going to be negative, and then 18 times 1 is 18. So there's my answer, negative 18. All right, C, from left to right, here we go. Negative 3 times negative 4 is going to give me positive 12. So I'm going to rewrite my problem, positive 12 times negative 5 times negative 1. And then I'm going to do positive 12 times negative 5. So different signs, so my answer is negative. 12 times 5 is 60. And then same signs that I'm multiplying. A negative times a negative is a positive, and 60 times 1 is 60. So my answer is 60. All right, so please utilize that order of operations from back in section 4. It is going to save you a lot of time when you get to these more complicated problems. This also works with multiplication of fractions and decimals, but you again still need to obey all the rules from fractions. So I noticed this we only have 2 numbers that we're multiplying, so we have to use the rules on this one. So I have a negative times a positive, so different signs, so my answer will be negative. And then I'm going to multiply their absolute values. So again, when you're multiplying fractions, remember you should look for anything that you can simplify first. And I noticed that the only factors I have in the numerator are 5, and there are no factors of 5 in the denominator. So I'm just going to multiply straight across. So negative 5 times 1 is 5, and 6 times 4 is 24. So there is my final answer, negative 5/24. So yes, you're still going to have to remember all the rules of working with fractions. Remember, math is progressive. We are constantly building on the information that we learned before. Nothing ever goes away. Everything will always come back. So all this stuff that you hear me talk about in chapter 1, you will hear me talk about in later chapters. It's not going to go away. So it's really important that you learn it, not just learn it for now, but learn it forever. All right, B, we have a positive times a negative, which means we're going to have a negative, right? We have different signs, and then you're going to multiply their absolute values. So we're going to multiply 6 times 2.3. In this case, please feel free to use your calculator. 6 times 2.3 is 13.8, so my answer is negative 13.8. But again, if you are trying very hard not to use your calculator, you can go off to the side and do 2.3 times 6. So you can do that long division, the multiplication out. So 6 times 3 is 18, carry the 1. 6 times 2 is 12, 12 plus 1 is 13. And remember, we have 1 decimal place in the problem, so 1 decimal place in the answer. So again, use that information from the first day when we talked about those basics assessments where we had to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, whole numbers and decimals. Remember, you are responsible for knowing all that information. If you have powers, remember, powers are repeated multiplication. So this problem, negative 2 with parentheses around it to the 4th power. That means our base is negative 2. So this problem is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. That is 4 factors of negative 2 multiplied together. And I would use order of operations on this as well. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, and then rewrite the problem. Do the next multiplication. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8, and then rewrite the rest of the problem. And then lastly, negative 8 times negative 2 is positive 16. So make sure that you're remembering those definitions of exponents that we talked about at the beginning of section 1.4. This next example is a little different. So we have negative 8 squared. Now, that is the negative of 8 squared. Notice there's no parentheses, so the base in this case is 8. The negative is not included. So this is just the negative of 8 squared, and 8 squared is 8 times 8, 2 factors of 8 multiplied together. So that is negative 64. So notice the subtle difference between that problem and the last. If I had parentheses around that negative 8, then that would be negative 8 times negative 8, which would be positive 64. So very small difference in the original problem, totally different way that you will do it. So it's really important that you pay attention to those fine details in algebra. All right, before we can talk about division, we have to review a little bit about finding reciprocals. We talked about reciprocals back in section 1.3. So remember, reciprocals are when you flip the fraction, right? You flip it over. Another way that people talk about this is that if you have 2 numbers that when you multiply them together you get 1, they have to be reciprocals. And if you think about it, it makes sense. 3 times 1/3 is 1. So 3 and 1/3 are reciprocals, which we know. 3, if we put a 1 over it, flip it upside down, we get 1/3. Very important to also remember that 0 does not have a reciprocal. You cannot flip 0 over, because if you do 0 over 1, if you flip it, you will get 1 divided by 0, and we cannot divide by 0. That's not allowed. Okay, so 0 does not have a quotient. It's one of the, 0 does not have a reciprocal. It's one of the very few, actually it's the only number that doesn't have a reciprocal. That's kind of crazy. So yeah, so another thing, 0, special, very special number, 0 and 1. I could teach a whole semester course on 0 and 1. All right, so when you get to these problems in the homework, they are going to ask you some very easy ones, so don't be shocked when you get there. Okay, what is the reciprocal of 55? It is 1 over 55. That's it. That's all they want. Okay, what is the reciprocal of negative 3/7? That is negative 7/3. Remember, reciprocal just means flip. You're just going to flip it. Don't do anything to the sign. Remember, that opposite means you change the sign. So do not get opposite and reciprocal mixed up. Reciprocal means flip it. Opposite means change the sign. Very important that you know those vocabulary words. All right, so let's talk about dividing. So when you are dividing real numbers, we're going to use the same properties that we did back in section 1. Rather than dividing, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, just like we did back in section 1.3. So nothing new to cover. And it turns out that the quotient rules are the same if you're dividing. So if you are dividing the same sign, your answer is going to be positive. So you're just going to keep the positive sign and then divide their absolute values. If the two numbers have different signs, then your answer is going to be negative, and then you're going to divide their absolute values. So the good news is nothing much more to talk about than what we did with multiplication. All right, so let me just show you what the work's going to look like, because usually for most students that they just need to see what's expected when it comes to work. All right, so if we look at A, we have a positive divided by a negative. They are different signs, so the answer is going to be negative. I'm going to put our parentheses, and then we're going to divide their absolute values. So 42 divided by 7 is 6. So the answer is negative 6. So again, notice not a lot of work, but you have to show the rule, right? Show the rule and then show your answer. Very important that you show both of those things, rule and the answer. All right, B, we've got a negative divided by a negative, so same sign, so the answer is positive. And then we're going to divide their absolute values. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. So my answer is positive 8. And in C, we've got a negative divided by a positive. So different signs, so my answer is negative. And then we're just going to divide their absolute values. So 80 divided by 10 is 8. So my answer is negative 8. All right, so let's review a little bit about fractions. Okay, we talked about fractions back in section 1, so now we're going to put fractions together and this new rule that we learned about dividing signed numbers. Okay, so first thing I noticed, we have a negative and a positive. So I know that this problem, the answer is going to be negative. So I can divide their absolute values. Now, back in section 1.3, we talked about this. How do we divide fractions? Okay, we are going to keep, change to multiplication, and flip it. Okay, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. And then we will use our rules that we talked about before back in section 1. So let's look at just inside the parentheses. Okay, 5 is prime, 2 is prime, and 3 is prime. So 9 is the only one we need to break up, and 9 is 3 times 3. So this 3 and this 3 will divide out, and that's all that will divide out. So my answer is negative, right? Because we got that negative there. All that I have left in the numerator is 5, and in the denominator I have 3 times 2, which is 6. So there's my final answer, negative 5, 6. So if you want to pause and try B, feel free. Here we go. So we have a negative divided by a negative, so that means my answer will be positive, and then I'm going to divide their absolute values. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to a multiplication problem. So 2/7 times 5 over 1. All of these are prime, so there's nothing that I can simplify. So my answer is positive, and then multiply your numerators. 2 times 5 is 10, and 7 times 1 is 7. So positive 10/7 is my answer. Remember, when you are dividing by 0, you have two rules. If you have a denominator of 0, that is not defined. So please make sure that you cannot, anytime you see a division by 0, it's undefined. I had a student that told me instead of using a, I should use n over 0 because it spells no, you cannot do that. All right, but if you have 0, you can divide that. 0 divided by anything is still going to be 0. And I think of it this way. If you have no pizza and you're going to divide it amongst 10 of your friends, nobody's getting pizza. Everybody is equal. Everybody gets the same amount, which is nothing. All right, so there's not a lot of work you can show on these. So look at A. 0 divided by negative 7. This is fine. We have no pizza. Doesn't matter how many ways I divide it, I'm still going to have nothing. B, I have 8 divided by 0. Remember, you cannot divide by 0. In fact, if you put that problem in your calculator, it's going to give you an error. Okay, that is undefined. So we are going to write out undefined. You can actually talk about theoretically what it means to divide by 0, but that's in very many classes away. It's a class called number theory. So if you ever are more interested in that, please feel free to take number theory. It's a really great class. All right, there's more evaluating at the end of this section. Okay, well, again, we're constantly pressing that evaluating because you're going to be doing a lot of evaluating in your math and science classes. All right, so here we go. Use order of operations. Now, in this case, they have already filled in the numbers for us, which is great. So really all we're doing is using order of operations. So important to remember, inside the parentheses first. Now, if you look at A inside the parentheses, nothing going on. So that's nice. There's no exponents for us to deal with, but we do have multiplications. We have a multiplication here and we have a multiplication here. So we need to do those first. 7 times negative 9 is going to give me negative 63 plus 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. All right, and if you look, we are adding two numbers together that have the same sign. So we are going to keep the sign and we're going to add their absolute values. So my answer is negative 75. All right, B, this has a fraction bar. So remember, you're going to treat the numerator and denominator as completely separate problems. Let's do the numerator first. I'm going to move down here a little bit so I have some more space. So first thing I see is a multiplication problem right here. So I have 8 minus 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. And I notice subtracting a negative means we're going to be adding. And 8 plus 6 is 14. All right, so I've completely done my numerator. Now let's completely do the denominator. So I need to, again, I've got this multiplication I have to do first. So I have negative 9 minus 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Again, subtracting a negative is adding. So I have negative 9 plus 6. Negative 9 plus 6 is negative 3. So I now have a division problem. I have a positive divided by a negative. Notice, different signs means my answer is going to be negative, and then I'm going to divide their absolute values. And in this case, 14 thirds cannot be divided, so we're just going to leave it just like that, negative 14 thirds. Another expression that you need to evaluate, this time they do have variables. So first thing I'm going to do is take that expression, replace all the variables with parentheses. Instead of an x, I'm going to put a negative 6 right here, and instead of a y, I'm going to put an 8 right there. Notice this is all multiplying from left to right, so I'm going to go from left to right using order of operations. So 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. Again, rewrite the problem, negative 42 times 8. We have a negative times a positive, which means our answer is going to be negative, and then 42 times 8 is 336. Again, if you need to, go off to the side and do 42 times 8. Try to do as much of this as you possibly can without using your calculator. You will thank me later. The more you can do in your head, the better off you're going to be. All right, so if you'd like to press pause, go ahead and try these two on your own. All right, so let's look at the first one. First thing I'm going to do is replace all of my variables with parentheses. All right, and the y is negative 5, so negative 5 goes up here, and the x is negative 1, so negative 1 goes here. All right, in my numerator, I have a multiplication problem. Positive times a negative is negative 15. In my denominator, positive times a negative, negative 45. All right, a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so it's the positive of 15 divided by 45. 15 and 45 have two factors in common, right? They are both divisible by 15, so this is 1 times 15. And this is 3 times 15. So those 15s will divide out, and I'm left with positive 1/3 as my final answer. Now, some people may have just taken out the factor of 5 first and then taken the factor of 3 out. You can do that. It just means you're going to do multiple simplifications. I just did one by always looking for that greatest common factor. All right, B, same thing. Start by having our skeleton. Okay, instead of an x, we're going to put negative 1, and instead of a y, we're going to put negative 5. So negative 1 squared, that is negative 1 times negative 1, which is positive 1. And we're going to bring down the subtraction sign. Do this here. This is negative 5 times negative 5 times negative 5. which is -125 when you multiply it all out. Subtracting a negative means that you're adding. So 1 plus 125 is 126. So there's my final answer. All right, so now we have gone all through chapter 1. So please feel free to go watch some more videos, do some homeworks, and we will see you in time for the chapter 1 test.